The Sahara Desert, stretching endlessly across North Africa, is a realm of extremes. Waves of golden sand shimmer under the relentless sun by day, while temperatures plummet beneath the moon at night. For millennia, humans have crossed this vast, unforgiving landscape, driven by trade, migration, or survival. The desert is not merely a physical barrier, it is a test of endurance, knowledge, and willpower, where every decision could mean life or death. Caravans traversing the Sahara relied on meticulous preparation. Leaders, often experienced guides, calculated routes based on seasonal winds, the availability of water sources, and the position of the stars. Camels, prized for their ability to endure dehydration and carry heavy loads, were carefully managed. Supplies were rationed strictly. Water, grains, dried meat, dates, and other essentials were measured with precision. Every traveler understood that waste or misjudgment could jeopardize the entire caravan. Navigating the desert required extraordinary skill. During the day, travelers relied on landmarks, the shape of dunes, and the subtle changes in sand patterns to maintain direction. At night, the stars became their map. Guides memorized constellations, tracking the movement of the heavens to ensure the caravan stayed on course. Knowledge was passed orally from generation to generation, forming a living library of survival wisdom that blended astronomy, geography, and practical experience. Heat was a constant adversary. During daylight, temperatures soared, making physical exertion exhausting and dangerous. Travelers managed their pace carefully, often resting during the hottest hours and resuming their journey when the sun began its descent. Water consumption was measured carefully, every sip counted. Camels were similarly rationed, and their strength preserved for the long trek ahead. Survival depended on understanding the body's limits and balancing effort with rest. Sandstorms added another layer of danger. Clouds of fine sand could reduce visibility to a few meters, disorienting even the most experienced guides. Caravans huddled together, covering faces and waiting for the storm to pass, while leaders kept a constant watch for changes in the wind and sky. Sand could clog breathing passages, abrade skin, and damage supplies, making preparation and protective measures essential. Experience and calm judgment often determined whether a caravan survived or was scattered and lost in the shifting dunes. Food scarcity compounded the challenge. Caravans carried only what they could transport, relying on rationing and careful planning. Dates, dried meats, and grains provided essential calories, while occasional hunting of desert wildlife supplemented nutrition. Survival required discipline, cooperation, and foresight. A single misjudgment in rationing could lead to dehydration, exhaustion, or death. Camels were equally dependent on water and feed, and their health was critical for the caravan's progress. Psychological resilience was as crucial as physical endurance. The monotony of the endless sand, the isolation from familiar landscapes, and the mental strain of survival demanded unwavering focus. Guides reinforced morale through stories, songs, and traditions. Cultural knowledge became both instruction and motivation, teaching younger travelers the lessons of patience, observation, and adaptability. Fear, though constant, was harnessed as a tool for vigilance rather than panic. Encounters with oases represented both relief and risk. Fresh water, shade, and edible vegetation provided temporary respite. Yet oases were also potential sources of conflict, requiring negotiation and diplomacy when multiple caravans converged. Guides assessed resources carefully, ensuring that water and food were sufficient to sustain the group before moving onward. Every stop was strategically planned, balancing replenishment with the need to continue the journey. The desert demanded innovation. Travelers learned to protect themselves from the sun with clothing and head coverings, to manage hydration carefully, and to read the environment for hidden dangers. Sand patterns, animal tracks, and distant mirages were interpreted to make critical decisions about direction and speed. Every member of the caravan contributed, from tending camels to maintaining supplies, reinforcing the communal nature of desert survival. Crossing the Sahara was not merely a test of strength, it was a testament to human ingenuity, observation, and adaptability. Caravans that endured this harsh environment relied on a profound understanding of nature, meticulous planning, cooperation, and the wisdom of generations. Survival was not just reaching the other side of the desert, it was about learning to live in harmony with an environment that demanded respect, caution, and relentless determination. The desert, in its vastness and hostility, became both adversary and teacher, forging humans who could endure the extremes and carry forward knowledge that ensured the survival of culture, trade, and life itself. The desert's heat was relentless. By mid-morning, the sun transformed the sand into a shimmering sea of molten gold. Temperatures soared, testing the endurance of every caravan member. Sweat poured endlessly, and the risk of dehydration was constant. Travelers learned to regulate effort carefully, walking in rhythm with the camels, pausing in shaded depressions whenever possible, and conserving energy for the most demanding stretches. Each decision, how fast to travel, when to rest, and how much water to consume, was a matter of survival. Water scarcity dominated daily life. Even a single miscalculation in rationing could be fatal. Guides measured every sip, ensuring that each traveler and camel could survive until the next well or oasis. Knowledge of hidden water sources, dried riverbeds, and underground springs was crucial. Some guides used vegetation as indicators. The presence of certain shrubs or clusters of palm trees often signaled subterranean water. Every drop conserved could mean the difference between life and death, and careful observation became as essential as courage. Food management was equally critical. Caravans carried limited provisions, often dried grains, dates, salted meats, and dried fish. Rations were strictly monitored, and sharing was mandatory to prevent loss of life. Hunger was constant but managed through careful planning. Travelers learned to stretch every morsel, supplementing with wild plants and occasionally catching desert animals. Camels, vital for transport, required feeding and watering according to strict schedules to maintain strength for the grueling journey ahead. Traveling across vast dunes demanded extraordinary physical skill and balance. The soft, shifting sand sapped energy with every step, while steep dune ridges could stretch for kilometers. Guides taught travelers how to walk with minimal effort, using rhythmic steps and the support of staffs or poles. Camels, adapted for such terrain, required experienced handlers to navigate steep slopes and avoid being trapped in soft sand. Every movement, every adjustment was a calculated effort to conserve energy and avoid injury. The stars became the navigator's most trusted tool. As night fell, the sky transformed into a map of constellations, guiding the caravan across featureless terrain. Guides memorized the positions of key stars, understanding how they shifted over the seasons. Even subtle deviations could send the caravan miles off course. Travelers learned to observe the subtle differences in starlight, the reflection on dunes, and the behavior of nocturnal desert animals as indicators of direction. Navigation was an art, honed through observation, memory, and experience passed down over generations. Sandstorms were sudden and terrifying. Winds could rise in minutes, reducing visibility to mere meters and forcing travelers to halt progress. Sand scoured exposed skin, clogged eyes, and filled mouths and nostrils, making breathing difficult. Caravans would huddle together, covering faces with cloth, and rely on the guide's memory to maintain orientation. Survival depended on discipline, patience, and mutual trust. Panic could separate travelers from the group, leading to disorientation, exhaustion, or death. Heat exhaustion and the psychological toll of monotony added another layer of danger. Endless sand and sky blurred into a monotonous landscape, testing morale. Guides maintained group cohesion with songs, chants, and storytelling, passing on survival lessons and historical knowledge. Knowledge of past journeys repeated in rhythmic patterns reinforced focus, confidence, and determination. Mental endurance became as vital as physical endurance, creating a balance that allowed humans to persist despite overwhelming challenges. Oases offered temporary relief but brought their own challenges. Fresh water, shade, and edible vegetation provided much-needed respite. However, oases were often crowded, attracting other travelers or local communities. Guides negotiated access carefully, ensuring that water and food could sustain the caravan without conflict. They observed the surrounding environment, checking for predators, unstable terrain, or hidden hazards. Every stop required strategy, foresight, and vigilance to ensure that temporary relief did not lead to new dangers. Animals, both wild and domesticated, played a critical role. Camels were the backbone of the caravan, carrying loads, sustaining travelers, and navigating treacherous sand. Desert wildlife, including snakes, scorpions, and predatory birds, required constant awareness. Travelers learned to coexist, avoid danger, and occasionally harvest resources. Understanding the behaviors of animals provided both practical survival knowledge and insight into the delicate balance of the desert ecosystem. Crossing the Sahara was a continuous lesson in adaptability, endurance, and cooperation. Caravans survived through careful planning, strict rationing, expert navigation, and the psychological resilience of every member. The desert, with its extremes of heat, isolation, and unpredictability, demanded a combination of skill, observation, and human ingenuity. Those who survived not only reached their destination, but carried forward knowledge, cultural practices, and survival strategies that would guide generations across the unforgiving sands of one of the world's most formidable environments. Nightfall in the Sahara brought both relief and new challenges. As the sun sank below the horizon, temperatures dropped sharply, turning the scorching desert into a chilling expanse. Travelers who had endured relentless heat now faced freezing nights, and the transition tested the human body's adaptability. Maintaining warmth became critical. Layered clothing, fires at campsites, and close grouping of camels and travelers provided necessary insulation. Survival required constant vigilance even in moments of apparent respite. Nocturnal navigation became essential. The stars offered a reliable guide when the landscape was otherwise featureless. Guides memorized the positions of key constellations and tracked their movement to maintain the caravan's direction. Subtle environmental cues, such as the reflective shimmer of sand or the behavior of nocturnal animals, provided additional orientation. Each night required precision. A single miscalculation could result in the caravan drifting miles off course, placing travelers at risk of dehydration, starvation, or exposure by dawn. Sandstorms at night presented a terrifying variation of desert hazards. With limited visibility, the caravan relied entirely on experience and memory. Guides issued clear, calm instructions while travelers huddled together, covering faces and minimizing contact with abrasive sand. Camels, trained for endurance, pressed forward with careful guidance. Panic could be fatal. The discipline of the group, the trust in the guide, and the shared knowledge of desert behavior determined whether the caravan survived or became lost in a sea of shifting dunes. Encounters with other travelers or nomadic tribes often occurred under the cover of darkness. Such meetings were fraught with both opportunity and danger. Exchange of information about water sources, safe routes, and potential hazards could enhance survival. Conversely, misunderstandings or territorial disputes could escalate into conflict. Guides mediated interactions carefully, assessing risk and opportunity before approaching or communicating. Diplomacy, observation, and respect for local customs became survival tools, ensuring safe passage and access to essential resources. Food and water management at night required careful planning. Rations consumed during the day had to be conserved for overnight and early morning travel. Water collected from wells or oases was measured meticulously. Camels, dependent on these resources for endurance, were monitored closely. A single error in distribution could imperil the entire caravan, highlighting the critical role of leadership and discipline in desert survival. The desert's wildlife introduced both sustenance and danger. Nocturnal predators, including snakes and scorpions, emerged under the cover of darkness. Travelers had to remain alert while tending to fires, preparing food, or resting. Camels, sensitive to unusual movement or sounds, often alerted humans to nearby threats. Observation, knowledge of animal behavior, and careful vigilance reduced risk and enhanced the probability of survival. Mental resilience remained paramount. Isolation under the vast, starlit sky could induce fear, anxiety, and disorientation. Travelers relied on traditions, storytelling, and song to maintain focus and morale. Guides shared historical accounts of survival, teaching younger members the lessons of patience, observation, and collective responsibility. The desert's harshness cultivated a mental discipline that was inseparable from physical endurance. Extreme weather events, such as sudden temperature drops, sandstorms, or unanticipated drought, demanded adaptability. Caravans adjusted schedules, altered routes, or rationed provisions more strictly in response to environmental changes. Flexibility and rapid decision-making became as essential as navigational skill. Each challenge reinforced the importance of preparation, teamwork, and the ability to interpret subtle environmental cues for survival. Leadership dynamics were crucial during these nocturnal journeys. Guides balanced authority with collaboration, directing movement while listening to observations from scouts and experienced travelers. Decisions about direction, pace, and risk management were made collectively but executed with precision. Every member of the caravan had a role, managing camels, monitoring rations, observing environmental cues, and maintaining morale. This social cohesion was as critical as technical skill in ensuring survival. Crossing the Sahara under the stars was a profound exercise in human endurance, observation, and adaptability. The desert demanded respect and knowledge, testing travelers physically, mentally, and socially. Night brought relief from heat, but introduced new dangers requiring skillful navigation, rationing, vigilance, and cooperation. Those who survived did not merely reach their destinations, they carried forward a legacy of knowledge, wisdom, and survival strategies that would guide countless generations across one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. The Sahara was merciless during the day, especially during prolonged heat waves. Travelers faced blistering temperatures, often exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, turning every step into a battle against exhaustion. Sweat poured relentlessly and dehydration loomed as a constant threat. Camels, though adapted for such extremes, also suffered if water and feed were insufficient. Every moment required calculated effort. Moving too quickly risked collapse, while moving too slowly extended exposure to the relentless sun. Mirages added psychological as well as physical challenges. The heat rising from endless sand distorted the horizon, creating illusions of distant water sources or vegetation. Less experienced travelers, desperate for relief, might be drawn off course, wasting precious energy and resources. Guides taught their crews to interpret mirages correctly, using subtle environmental cues, shifting shadows, wind direction, and the behavior of wildlife to distinguish illusion from reality. Knowledge and experience became a matter of life and death. Water management was elevated to an art form. Oases, wells, and hidden springs were rare, and their discovery often determined the caravan's success or failure. Guides calculated daily water allowances meticulously, rationing every drop for travelers and camels alike. Even the water containers themselves required careful handling. gourds and leather pouches were insulated from the sun to prevent overheating and evaporation. In some cases, travelers learned to extract moisture from plants or dig shallow wells to supplement scarce supplies. Every precaution increased the chance of survival in the punishing desert. Food scarcity remained critical. Caravans carried only what could be transported by camels, often dried grains, dates, and preserved meats. Rations were distributed evenly and monitored closely. Travelers learned to extend food by adjusting energy expenditure, eating small portions, and supplementing with desert plants or occasional animals caught along the way. Camels also needed feeding, their strength critical to transporting both supplies and people. Mismanagement of provisions could quickly escalate into life-threatening circumstances. Heat-related illnesses were a constant danger. Sunstroke, heat exhaustion, and dehydration were frequent threats that could incapacitate even the most experienced travelers. Preventive strategies included wearing protective clothing, limiting exposure during peak sunlight, and traveling at slower, steady paces. Guides monitored each traveler and camel closely, recognizing early signs of distress and intervening immediately. Survival required constant vigilance and the ability to respond quickly to physical warning signs. Caravan cohesion was vital under these extreme conditions. Leaders maintained order, enforced rationing, and ensured that travelers followed prescribed rest and travel schedules. Any disruption, arguments, overexertion, or disobedience could imperil the entire group. Mutual trust, cooperation, and shared responsibility were as important as technical knowledge, reinforcing the communal nature of desert survival. Each member of the caravan had a role, from monitoring water supplies to observing environmental hazards, ensuring collective resilience. Environmental awareness became second nature. Travelers learned to read subtle signs, changes in wind patterns, the position of the sun, the behavior of birds, and even the texture of the sand. These cues indicated the proximity of water, potential obstacles, or upcoming weather changes. Guides trained travelers to observe meticulously, teaching that survival depended on both immediate perception and long-term anticipation. The desert demanded constant attentiveness. Neglecting even minor details could prove fatal. Psychological endurance remained critical. Heat waves, combined with the monotony of sand and sky, tested morale. Travelers relied on stories, songs, and oral traditions to maintain mental resilience. Guides reinforced lessons from past expeditions, teaching patience, perseverance, and adaptive thinking. Maintaining focus, hope, and mental clarity was as important as rationing water or avoiding sunstroke. The desert, in its extremes, tested both body and mind. Adaptation strategies evolved over successive journeys. Travelers learned to pace themselves, to recognize signs of fatigue and dehydration, and to support one another. Camels were treated with care, routes were adjusted for optimal shade or wind, and rest breaks were timed to conserve energy. Experience refined every decision, from when to travel to how to approach a hidden oasis. These lessons, passed from guide to apprentice, ensured that knowledge accumulated across generations, enhancing survival for future caravans. Crossing the Sahara during relentless heat waves exemplified human ingenuity, endurance, and cooperation. Travelers survived not by chance, but through preparation, observation, and disciplined execution of survival strategies. They adapted to extremes, learned to interpret subtle environmental cues, managed resources with precision, and preserved communal cohesion. In doing so, they turned an unforgiving desert into a navigable realm, proving that human resilience, knowledge, and cooperation could triumph even in one of Earth's harshest landscapes. Sandstorms were among the most fearsome hazards of the Sahara, capable of striking without warning and transforming familiar terrain into disorienting chaos. What had been a clear horizon could vanish beneath walls of whirling sand, reducing visibility to mere meters. For caravans, these storms were not simply inconvenient, they were life-threatening. Camels, laden with supplies, could panic or stumble, travelers could become separated, and every decision in those moments carried immense weight. Survival depended on preparation, composure, and trust in both leaders and fellow travelers. Guides employed decades of accumulated knowledge to mitigate the dangers of sandstorms. Prior to departure, they trained their crews to respond quickly to changing wind patterns. Once a storm appeared, travelers huddled close to camels, covering their faces with cloth or leather to prevent inhalation of sand. Navigation shifted from visual cues to memory, instinct, and understanding of previous terrain. Even a small lapse in concentration could result in the caravan straying miles from its intended path. Calm leadership was essential, as panic could lead to dispersal, injury, or death. Physical endurance was tested to its limits. Battling against the wind, trudging through deep, shifting sand, and maintaining stability on dunes required immense strength and coordination. Camels, with their padded feet and remarkable resilience, were critical in supporting human endurance. Guides ensured that load distribution on the animals remained balanced and that resting points were used strategically even during the chaos of a storm. Every movement, every action was deliberate and calculated to maximize survival chances. Orientation relied on stars, subtle environmental cues, and collective memory. Experienced guides read wind direction, dune patterns, and the faint outlines of previously observed landmarks to maintain course. At night, the constellations became the primary compass. They memorized the precise position of certain stars relative to the horizon, using them to correct deviations caused by wind, fatigue, or disorientation. Younger travelers learned quickly that survival was as much about observation and memory as it was about physical strength. Resource management during storms was especially critical. Water, already scarce, could not be wasted, and food rations were carefully monitored. Camels were given priority for hydration, as their endurance directly impacted the caravan's ability to continue. Guides adjusted pace and rest periods based on the severity of conditions, ensuring that both animals and humans could sustain themselves until normal travel resumed. Every decision had to account for both immediate needs and long-term survival. Psychological resilience was continually challenged. The roaring wind, the blinding sand, and the sense of isolation created an environment ripe for fear and panic. Guides reinforced focus through oral instruction, chants, and storytelling. Historical accounts of previous successful crossings reminded travelers of human capability and collective endurance. The shared experience of adversity strengthened bonds among caravan members, transforming fear into vigilance and cooperation. Encounters with other desert travelers during sandstorms were rare but crucial. Temporary alliances often formed, allowing caravans to combine knowledge, share resources, or navigate more safely through particularly treacherous stretches. Such interactions required careful negotiation and mutual trust, as desperation could provoke conflict. Guides assessed risk and opportunity carefully, determining whether collaboration would enhance survival or introduce danger. Understanding the desert's natural indicators was essential for anticipating storms and navigating safely. Subtle changes in wind, cloud formations, and the behavior of desert wildlife provided early warning. Guides taught travelers to recognize these cues, interpreting the environment with precision. Over time, experience honed intuition, enabling some guides to predict storms hours in advance. This foresight was invaluable in preserving both life and resources. Cultural knowledge intertwined with survival techniques. Songs, oral histories, and proverbs contained embedded lessons about weather patterns, hidden water sources, and past challenges. Younger travelers memorized these stories not as entertainment, but as practical survival manuals. The desert demanded respect for both the land and the accumulated wisdom of those who had crossed it before. Knowledge of tradition became as essential as technical skill, ensuring continuity of survival strategies across generations. Crossing the Sahara during sandstorms highlighted the extreme demands of the desert environment. Survival was not accidental, but the result of careful planning, rigorous observation, disciplined execution, and psychological fortitude. Travelers relied on each other, their animals, and the guidance of experienced leaders to navigate uncertainty. Every storm, every challenge reinforced lessons about endurance, adaptability, and the profound intelligence required to thrive in one of Earth's most unforgiving landscapes. Through such trials, humans not only survived but forged knowledge and strategies that would guide generations, turning the vast Sahara into a navigable and life-sustaining environment despite its apparent hostility. Water was the lifeblood of the Sahara, dictating the rhythm of every caravan journey. Survival in the desert required not only endurance but intimate knowledge of hidden water sources, oases, and seasonal wells. These resources were often scarce and dispersed across hundreds of kilometers of shifting dunes. Guides relied on centuries of accumulated wisdom, memorizing locations, studying vegetation, and observing animal behavior to locate life-sustaining water. Each discovery of water was a critical victory, determining the caravan's capacity to endure days or weeks in otherwise barren terrain. Oases were not merely sources of water, they were hubs of survival, trade, and cultural exchange. Palm groves, small springs, and patches of vegetation offered food, shelter, and a chance to rest weary travelers and animals. Guides carefully assessed the quality and quantity of available resources, deciding how long the caravan could safely remain. Every decision balanced immediate needs with the necessity of preserving resources for the continuation of the journey. Mismanagement could deplete water, endanger lives, or create conflict with other travelers or nomadic communities. Hidden wells and subterranean springs were particularly valuable. Experienced guides knew subtle signs in the sand and plant life that indicated underground water. Certain clusters of shrubs, the appearance of moisture-loving insects, or the behavior of birds could reveal sources invisible to the untrained eye. Accessing these wells often required physical labor, digging through sand or clearing obstructions, yet the effort was critical to sustain life. Each successful identification reinforced the importance of observation, intuition, and environmental knowledge for survival. Water rationing was an exacting science. Travelers and camels received carefully measured amounts to extend the supply until the next source could be reached. Every drop was precious, and no one could afford indulgence. Guides meticulously monitored consumption, intervening when travelers were careless or unaware. Camels, the backbone of the caravan, were prioritized as their endurance directly impacted the survival of all. Even a small miscalculation could have cascading consequences, jeopardizing the health of the animals, the crew, and the overall progress of the journey. The psychological impact of scarce water was profound. Anxiety and fear could escalate rapidly, especially when heat, fatigue, or sandstorms compounded the challenge. Maintaining calm and focus became essential. Guides reinforced discipline through stories, oral histories, and repeated instructions. Travelers internalized these lessons, understanding that panic could accelerate dehydration, fatigue, and error. Mental resilience was inseparable from physical endurance in the unforgiving desert environment. Travelers also learned to supplement limited water through natural means. Certain desert plants, roots, and cacti contained moisture that could be extracted when necessary. Camels, adapted to retain water efficiently, provided a buffer against scarcity but could not eliminate the need for careful planning. Observing the desert's subtle ecological cues became a survival skill. Guides taught travelers to monitor plant health, track wildlife, and interpret environmental signs as indicators of nearby water. These skills, honed over generations, formed a repository of knowledge essential for desert survival. Oases were also social and cultural touchpoints. Traders, nomads, and travelers converged at these rare hubs, exchanging goods, information, and news. Guides assessed potential interactions carefully, weighing the benefits of cooperation against the risks of conflict. Negotiation skills, diplomacy, and observation became as important as technical knowledge. These interactions could provide additional supplies, information on upcoming terrain, or warnings about impending storms, further enhancing the caravan's chance of survival. Preparation for water scarcity began long before departure. Caravans traveled with water containers, leather pouches, and gourds, ensuring redundancy in storage. Guides educated the group on emergency measures, including rationing techniques, heat management, and methods to extract hidden moisture. Travel schedules were adapted to minimize exposure to peak heat hours, with movement concentrated in early mornings, evenings, or nights whenever possible. Every precaution was designed to conserve water and energy. Knowledge of terrain and water sources passed down through generations was invaluable. Young travelers learned not only the physical techniques of survival, but also the cultural narratives that embedded environmental knowledge. Stories of previous crossings, misadventures, and successful strategies reinforced lessons that could save lives. Survival in the Sahara was a delicate balance of preparation, observation, physical endurance, and adherence to time-tested knowledge. Ultimately, survival depended on the integration of multiple skills: identifying hidden water, rationing limited resources, interpreting environmental cues, and maintaining both physical and mental resilience. The Sahara demanded that travelers think ahead, observe constantly, and act with precision. Those who mastered these strategies could endure the relentless heat, shifting sands, and scarcity of life-sustaining water, emerging from the desert not only alive, but enriched with knowledge, experience, and an intimate understanding of one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Long stretches between water sources tested both human and animal endurance to the utmost. Caravans often traveled for days, sometimes weeks, across endless sand seas with no visible signs of life or relief. During these intervals, survival depended on careful pacing, resource management, and an unwavering reliance on accumulated knowledge. Every decision mattered. The speed of travel, timing of rest, and rationing of water and food could determine whether the group reached the next oasis or perished in the relentless desert heat. Camels were indispensable allies on these journeys. Adapted to survive with minimal water, they could carry heavy loads over soft sand, traverse dunes with remarkable stability, and regulate body temperature in extreme heat. Guides trained camels to respond to commands precisely, ensuring that they maintained pace and balance, even when fatigue threatened to slow progress. Observing the camel's behavior also provided critical insight into the environment. Restless animals might indicate approaching storms, hidden obstacles, or predators. Their endurance was inseparable from the survival of the caravan itself. Navigation during these vast stretches was both art and science. Guides relied on a combination of stars, sun, dune patterns, and environmental cues to maintain direction. The shifting sands often erased tracks, and landmarks could appear distorted by mirages or heat haze. Every night, the position of familiar constellations allowed travelers to recalibrate their course. During the day, shadows, wind orientation, and subtle terrain variations provided guidance. Misjudgments could send the caravan miles off course, with consequences that included dehydration, disorientation, or separation from critical resources. Energy conservation became paramount. Walking on soft sand is exhausting. Travelers learn to distribute weight evenly, follow camel paths when possible, and take short, strategic rests to avoid collapse. Meals were designed to maximize caloric efficiency, and even small miscalculations in food consumption could result in fatigue and reduced cognitive function. Guides enforced strict routines, ensuring that travelers did not overexert themselves while maintaining a pace sufficient to reach the next water source before depletion of resources became critical. Heat, combined with wind, posed constant danger. Strong gusts could strip moisture from the skin, exacerbate dehydration, and create hazardous conditions for both humans and animals. Sand particles carried in swirling currents scoured exposed skin and eyes, making protective clothing, goggles, and coverings indispensable. Camels, often carrying essential supplies, required careful monitoring to prevent injuries or stress that could compromise the caravan's progress. Adaptation to environmental extremes was a continuous process, honed through experience and observation. Mental resilience was equally critical. Days of monotonous sand, scorching heat, and limited visibility could erode morale. Travelers relied on communal storytelling, songs, and repetition of traditional knowledge to maintain focus and determination. Guides emphasized the value of patience, collective effort, and vigilance, reinforcing the idea that survival was as much about mental endurance as it was about physical capability. The desert became a test not only of stamina but of concentration, adaptability, and psychological strength. Strategies for survival evolved over centuries. Travelers learned to anticipate wind patterns, recognize animal behavior, and interpret plant signals that indicated hidden water or upcoming terrain changes. Camels were managed carefully to preserve their energy and health. Every action, from rationing food and water to pacing movement and monitoring animal behavior, was deliberate. Experience was passed down orally, creating a detailed repository of knowledge that allowed future travelers to survive longer, travel farther, and mitigate risks more effectively. Encounters with other desert travelers or nomadic groups were both rare and significant. Such meetings allowed for exchange of water, food, or knowledge of terrain, providing opportunities to adjust routes or access resources otherwise unknown. However, potential conflicts over scarce resources required careful negotiation. Leaders evaluated every interaction cautiously, balancing the benefits of collaboration against the risks of dispute. Diplomacy, respect for local customs, and observation were essential survival tools alongside physical preparedness. Extended desert journeys demanded foresight and meticulous planning. Guides calculated travel schedules around the availability of water, shade, and night temperatures. They ensured that resources were preserved, that camels remained healthy, and that the group maintained cohesion. Even minor miscalculations could compound, creating cascading risks that imperiled survival. These calculations required experience, environmental awareness, and the ability to interpret subtle signs in a landscape that offered no margin for error. Crossing long stretches between oases demonstrated the profound interdependence between humans, animals, and the desert environment. Survival was a dynamic balance of observation, strategy, endurance, and cooperation. Travelers learned to anticipate challenges, adapt to extreme conditions, and rely on both their own resilience and the guidance of experienced leaders. In enduring these vast, inhospitable expanses, humans demonstrated extraordinary ingenuity, perseverance, and the ability to thrive in an environment that seemed designed to test every limit of physical and mental endurance. Survival in the Sahara was never only about physical endurance, it was equally about the cultural knowledge that shaped every journey. Generations of travelers had accumulated wisdom, stories, and traditions, encoding practical survival lessons into narratives, songs, and rituals. Young travelers were taught to listen attentively, learning from the experiences of those who had faced the desert's extremes. These oral traditions contained invaluable insights: the timing of trade routes, the locations of hidden wells, patterns of wind and sand, and even the behavior of desert animals. Knowledge passed through stories became as crucial as maps or tools, providing guidance for those who might otherwise be lost in the vast, unyielding expanse. Nomadic tribes played a central role in the transmission of this knowledge. They were the custodians of survival strategies, understanding the desert as an interconnected ecosystem of sand, wind, sun, and sparse vegetation. Their wisdom extended beyond mere observation. It encompassed social practices, rituals, and moral codes that regulated behavior in extreme conditions. Respect for water, careful resource sharing, and cooperation between tribes ensured that survival was possible in an environment where scarcity could easily breed conflict. Travelers who ignored these lessons often paid a harsh price, learning quickly that social cohesion and cultural understanding were essential for survival. Oral stories often contained coded instructions. A tale of a journey might include descriptions of landmarks, subtle shifts in sand patterns, or the appearance of certain plants as indicators of water or shelter. Songs conveyed rhythm and timing, teaching travelers the pace at which they could safely move across dunes without exhausting themselves or their animals. These narratives blended entertainment with instruction, reinforcing memory and focus, ensuring that vital knowledge was retained even under extreme stress. Through repeated storytelling, younger generations internalized lessons that could save lives, equipping them with both practical skills and psychological resilience. Trade routes themselves were cultural arteries that supported survival. Caravans traveling across the Sahara did not merely carry goods, they carried information. Knowledge of safe passages, hidden water sources, and the locations of hospitable tribes spread along these routes, creating a web of survival intelligence across vast distances. Guides relied on information gathered from other travelers, adjusting their routes based on environmental conditions, seasonal changes, and reports of dangers ahead. Survival was therefore a dynamic interplay between first-hand experience, shared knowledge, and the constant observation of the desert's subtle signs. Rituals and practices also played a role in maintaining morale and focus. Before embarking on long journeys, groups often performed ceremonies to honor the desert and seek protection. These rituals reinforced group cohesion, creating a psychological framework that fostered trust, respect, and discipline. Travelers were reminded of the collective responsibility to one another and to the environment, ensuring that cooperation and observation were prioritized above individual impulse. In the Sahara, adherence to ritual and tradition was not superstition, it was a practical method for reinforcing survival behaviors. The stars, central to navigation, were also imbued with cultural significance. Guides and travelers learned to read constellations not only for direction, but for seasonal patterns, understanding which stars heralded particular winds, sandstorms, or optimal travel periods. Knowledge of the heavens was thus both practical and symbolic, linking human survival to the greater rhythms of nature. Children were taught to memorize the night sky, learning the positions of key constellations and the subtle movements that indicated the passage of time and the approach of environmental hazards. This celestial literacy was indispensable for long desert journeys, where a single miscalculation could prove fatal. Even simple practices like rationing food or water were guided by tradition. Experienced travelers had refined techniques passed down from generations, teaching younger members how to consume minimal portions without weakening themselves, how to distribute water to camels efficiently, and how to prioritize energy expenditure during long marches. These seemingly mundane practices were embedded in daily routines, reinforced by observation, instruction, and repetition. Cultural knowledge became operationalized into survival strategy, blending the practical with the inherited wisdom of countless desert crossings. Stories also conveyed moral lessons, shaping behavior in ways that enhanced survival. Tales of travelers who ignored guides, overexerted themselves, or wasted water ended in tragedy, serving as cautionary examples. By embedding ethical instruction into survival narratives, elders ensured that respect, discipline, and foresight were internalized, guiding not only immediate behavior, but the development of responsible, resilient individuals capable of thriving under extreme conditions. Survival, in this sense, was both a physical and ethical endeavor, requiring awareness of one's actions, attention to the environment, and respect for communal norms. In essence, cultural knowledge formed the backbone of desert survival. It was a living archive of human ingenuity, observation, and experience, continuously updated and transmitted through storytelling, songs, rituals, and communal practices. Travelers who embraced this knowledge learned not only to endure the Sahara, but to navigate it with skill, anticipate its challenges, and respect its power. Survival in the desert was never accidental. It was a sophisticated interplay of tradition, observation, cooperation, and applied wisdom, ensuring that humans could thrive across one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. The Sahara was not an empty void. It teemed with life adapted to extremes, both a source of sustenance and a potential threat. Understanding and interacting with wildlife became essential for survival. Predators, venomous creatures, and scavengers tested the vigilance of travelers. Snakes and scorpions hid beneath dunes or within sparse vegetation, capable of delivering deadly bites to careless humans or animals. Guides taught their crews to recognize signs of these creatures, such as tracks in the sand or subtle shifts in vegetation, and to take precautions when camping or walking. Knowledge of venomous species and quick response to bites was a matter of life and death. Camels, critical companions on these journeys, also required protection from desert predators. Though formidable in size and strength, they could be injured or spooked by aggressive animals or sudden environmental hazards. Guides trained travelers to position camels strategically, to maintain vigilance at night, and to respond calmly to threats. Camels themselves were observant and often alerted humans to nearby danger through agitation or movement, acting as both partners and early warning systems in the desert ecosystem. Survival also depended on hunting and gathering skills. In certain stretches, small mammals, birds, or edible plants provided supplemental food, especially when rations ran low. Guides instructed travelers on which species were safe to consume, how to capture them without unnecessary risk, and how to use minimal effort for maximum caloric return. Even the smallest additions to the diet could mean the difference between sustained energy and debilitating weakness. Observation of animal behavior often indicated nearby water or food sources, creating a symbiotic understanding of desert ecology that guided both hunting and navigation. Nighttime brought additional dangers. Desert predators such as hyenas, foxes, and large birds emerged under the cover of darkness. Campfires, strategic positioning of camels, and constant vigilance provided essential protection. Guides organized watch shifts, ensuring that at least a portion of the caravan remained alert to any approaching threats. This system of rotation conserved energy while maintaining safety, balancing the human need for rest with the constant environmental risks. Psychological endurance was equally important. Even a brief lapse in attention could have catastrophic consequences. Weather extremes, predators, and scarcity of resources demanded adaptive strategies. Travelers learned to adjust clothing, movement, and behavior to minimize exposure. Loose, breathable fabrics protected against sun and sand, while layered garments insulated during cold nights. Pacing was carefully monitored to prevent overexertion, particularly during heat waves or extended travel between oases. Guides observed every individual, intervening when necessary to prevent fatigue, dehydration, or injury. This constant management ensured that both humans and animals maintained the strength required to complete the journey. Cultural practices enhanced wildlife awareness. Oral traditions contained encoded instructions about which animals were safe to approach, which were dangerous, and how to interpret subtle signs of movement in the desert. Stories of encounters with predators, successful hunts, or near disasters were repeated in song and narrative, reinforcing memory and teaching practical skills. By embedding survival lessons within cultural knowledge, Desert travelers ensured that crucial information persisted across generations, reducing risk and enhancing overall resilience. Trust and cooperation were critical when facing environmental threats. Travelers relied on each other to monitor camels, maintain rations, and respond to wildlife encounters. Panic or selfish behavior could quickly compromise safety, leading to injury or loss of resources. Strong group cohesion, reinforced through storytelling, rituals, and shared responsibility, ensured that every individual understood the importance of mutual support. Desert survival was as much a social endeavor as a technical one, requiring collaboration, discipline, and respect for both humans and the natural environment. Camels were not only transport but a source of knowledge and efficiency. Guides observed their behavior to anticipate environmental hazards, conserve energy, and optimize travel routes. Animals responded to subtle changes in terrain, wind, or vegetation, providing cues that humans might otherwise miss. By interpreting these signals, travelers learned to adjust pace, select safer paths, and predict potential obstacles. Camels thus became partners in survival, their instincts complementing human observation and expertise. Prolonged desert journeys also demanded psychological resilience. Isolation, monotony, and the constant threat of danger tested travelers' mental endurance. Guides used storytelling, songs, and repetitive instruction to maintain focus, morale, and vigilance. These cultural practices were not merely entertainment, they reinforced survival strategies, encouraged cooperation, and maintained attention to environmental cues. Mental preparedness, combined with physical endurance, formed a holistic approach to desert survival. In essence, survival in the Sahara required a deep, reciprocal relationship with its wildlife. Travelers learned to read the behaviors of animals, avoid predators, supplement food sources, and interpret environmental cues. Camels provided both transport and guidance, while cultural knowledge preserved centuries of lessons on coexistence with the desert ecosystem. Endurance, vigilance, and cooperation allowed caravans to navigate the harsh landscape, demonstrating that humans could thrive in extreme environments not through domination, but through understanding, adaptation, and respect for the intricate balance of life in the desert. The final stretches of a Sahara journey tested everything travelers had learned: endurance, observation, resource management, and psychological resilience. By the time the caravan approached its destination, an oasis, trade hub, or settlement, the group had been transformed. Physical exhaustion was countered by the sharpness of acquired skills, a profound understanding of desert patterns, and the unshakable bonds formed through shared adversity. Survival was no longer a daily struggle alone. It had become a collective achievement rooted in cooperation, knowledge, and respect for the desert's vast power. Arrival at an oasis was a moment of triumph, but also demanded continued vigilance. Water sources, though seemingly abundant compared to the open desert, were limited and often contested. Guides carefully managed access to springs and wells, rationing both water and shade to ensure recovery for humans and camels. Camels were allowed to drink gradually to prevent illness, and travelers rested strategically to regain strength without overexerting themselves. Even the final stages of a journey required disciplined attention to detail, reinforcing lessons learned over weeks of hardship. Oases also served as centers for replenishment and cultural exchange. Travelers traded goods, shared news, and passed along information about routes, hidden hazards, and environmental conditions. These exchanges were crucial, allowing caravans to prepare for the next stage of travel or for other groups to benefit from accumulated knowledge. Hospitality, negotiation, and respect for local customs were essential survival skills, ensuring safe passage and the continuity of trade networks across the desert. Each oasis visit was both practical and symbolic, marking progress and reinforcing the cultural knowledge that underpinned survival. The culmination of a journey brought a profound understanding of human adaptability. Travelers had faced relentless heat, freezing nights, sandstorms, predators, scarcity of water, and isolation, yet had endured through skill, observation, and cooperation. Camels had carried their burdens, guides had interpreted subtle signs of the environment, and collective discipline had prevented collapse. By the journey's end, each participant carried the experience not only as personal endurance but as part of a shared cultural memory, ready to instruct future generations. Lessons from desert survival extended beyond immediate survival strategies. Travelers developed heightened awareness, patience, and the ability to anticipate hazards long before they became apparent. These skills were applicable in other realms of life, fostering decision-making under uncertainty, careful resource management, and adaptability to changing conditions. Survival in the Sahara was, therefore, both a physical and intellectual achievement, training humans to think critically, observe diligently, and act decisively under extreme pressure. Reflecting on the journey, travelers understood the profound relationship between humans and the desert. The Sahara was simultaneously adversary and teacher. Its challenges, heat, sand, scarcity, and wildlife, demanded respect, attentiveness, and humility. Those who disregarded these lessons often failed, while those who embraced them not only survived but thrived. Knowledge of terrain, stars, water sources, and animal behavior became a living inheritance, ensuring that future caravans could navigate with confidence and wisdom. The desert also reinforced social cohesion. Survival required trust, cooperation, and shared responsibility. Every traveler had a role, from monitoring camels to rationing supplies, maintaining vigilance, and supporting weaker members. Groups that disregarded these principles risked disaster. Social structure, mutual dependence, and disciplined leadership were as critical as physical endurance, creating a framework that ensured collective survival and transmitted cultural knowledge across generations. Even after completing a journey, the desert's lessons persisted. Travelers recounted stories of sandstorms, mirages, hidden water sources, and encounters with wildlife, embedding practical survival strategies within narrative frameworks. These stories, passed down through oral traditions, ensured that knowledge was preserved for future generations. Maps, stars, and routes alone were insufficient. Survival depended on the integration of experience, observation, and cultural memory. Each tale reinforced vigilance, patience, adaptability, and respect for both environment and community. Ultimately, the Sahara journeys exemplified the intricate interplay between humans, animals, and the environment. Camels carried loads and provided subtle guidance. Guides interpreted the desert signals, and travelers applied knowledge, endurance, and cooperation to overcome adversity. Survival was achieved not by strength alone, but through observation, foresight, and adherence to cultural wisdom. Every challenge encountered became a lesson, every hazard a teacher, and every oasis a milestone in the ongoing narrative of human resilience. The enduring legacy of these desert journeys lay in their demonstration of human ingenuity, adaptability, and collaboration. Caravans traversed an inhospitable landscape, bridging distant lands, connecting communities, and transmitting knowledge. Each successful crossing validated centuries of accumulated wisdom and reinforced the principles of survival that would guide future generations. The Sahara, though harsh and unforgiving, became not merely a barrier, but a proving ground, forging skills, resilience, and cultural continuity that remain emblematic of humanity's capacity to endure and thrive in the most extreme environments. Even after completing a journey, reflection and preparation for future expeditions remained central to desert life. Travelers meticulously recorded observations, shared insights, and refined survival techniques. Guides noted subtle shifts in dune patterns, changes in vegetation, and seasonal variations in wind and temperature. Camels' responses to the terrain and to weather conditions were carefully observed, as these animals were critical indicators of the desert's moods. By documenting successes and failures, each caravan ensured that accumulated knowledge was passed on, creating a living legacy that improved the chances of survival for subsequent travelers. Recovery periods at oases were not idle. Travelers engaged in essential maintenance tasks, repairing equipment, replenishing supplies, and fortifying water containers. Camels were fed and rested, their health monitored with painstaking attention. Even minor injuries or signs of fatigue could jeopardize future travel, making preventive care critical. Guides trained younger travelers in these techniques, emphasizing both immediate restoration and long-term preparedness. By treating recovery as an integral part of survival, the caravan maintained resilience, ensuring that both humans and animals could face the next challenge with renewed strength. The role of community extended beyond the caravan itself. Interactions with local nomadic tribes, other travelers, and oasis dwellers provided opportunities to exchange information, negotiate safe passage, and share survival techniques. Guides were skilled diplomats, balancing caution with collaboration. These encounters were vital. They could reveal hidden wells, warn of upcoming sandstorms, or provide additional provisions. Survival was not merely a matter of endurance, but of social intelligence, recognizing the importance of alliances, mutual aid, and cultural understanding in one of the world's harshest environments. Psychological lessons persisted long after physical recovery. Travelers internalized the discipline required to ration resources, interpret environmental cues, and maintain vigilance. The desert demanded continuous mental engagement. Even small lapses could result in fatal consequences. Storytelling, songs, and ritual reinforced these lessons, ensuring that cognitive endurance complemented physical endurance. In the Sahara, survival was holistic. It required mind, body, and community to function in harmony, each component reinforcing the others. Camels remained central to these lessons. Observing their behavior provided critical insight into desert conditions. Restlessness might signal an approaching storm, reluctance to move could indicate fatigue or dehydration, and grazing patterns suggested the presence of hidden vegetation or water. Guides taught travelers to read these signs, interpreting animal behavior as an extension of environmental awareness. Camels were not merely beasts of burden, they were partners in navigation and survival, their instincts and responses intertwined with human decision-making. Resource management continued to be refined. Even after reaching an oasis, guides calculated optimal rations for the continuation of the journey. Water was distributed gradually to avoid illness, while food portions were adjusted to account for both immediate energy needs and the distance remaining to the next water source. Strategic planning extended beyond daily survival, encompassing the entirety of the desert crossing. This long-term perspective differentiated experienced travelers from novices, enabling the caravan to navigate uncertainty with precision. Cultural preservation remained intertwined with survival knowledge. Stories of past expeditions, including both triumphs and failures, were passed along to the next generation. Oral traditions included details about terrain, seasonal patterns, star positions, and animal behaviors, all encoded in memorable narratives. This ensured continuity of expertise, enabling travelers to benefit from centuries of accumulated wisdom. By embedding survival knowledge within cultural frameworks, communities maintained resilience in an environment that allowed no margin for error. Weather observation was continuous even after reaching an oasis. Guides monitored subtle changes in wind, humidity, and cloud formations, preparing for potential storms or temperature fluctuations. Travelers were trained to respond rapidly, whether by adjusting travel plans, modifying camp arrangements, or preparing camels for sudden shifts. Constant attentiveness to environmental signals was a skill cultivated over generations, reinforcing the importance of observation and proactive planning in desert survival. The desert also taught the value of patience and humility. Even after a successful crossing, travelers recognized that survival depended not only on personal skill, but on adherence to collective wisdom. Disrespect for the environment, reckless use of resources, or neglect of communal responsibilities often resulted in disaster. The Sahara demanded cooperation, careful planning, and acknowledgement of the desert's power. Those who succeeded internalized these lessons, carrying them forward in future expeditions and sharing them with their communities. Ultimately, survival in the Sahara was an ongoing process. Every journey, every encounter, and every observation contributed to a cumulative understanding of the desert. Travelers emerged not only physically hardened, but intellectually and culturally enriched, equipped with knowledge and strategies to endure the most extreme conditions. The Sahara was both teacher and adversary, shaping human ingenuity, fostering cooperation, and reinforcing the delicate balance required for survival. Each successful crossing added to the legacy of human resilience, illustrating that with preparation, observation, and collaboration, even the harshest landscapes could be navigated and respected. As the desert journey concluded, attention shifted from immediate survival to the transmission of knowledge. Guides and elders recognized that the lessons learned during the crossing could not remain with a single generation. They had to be shared, practiced, and internalized by future travelers. This transmission was deliberate, structured, and immersive. Young travelers were trained not only in practical survival skills, but in the cultural frameworks that encoded centuries of desert wisdom. From the first steps on sand to the final arrival at distant oases, each experience was both a personal challenge and an educational opportunity. Storytelling was central to this process. Tales of peril, endurance, and triumph were recounted around campfires, in tents, and during evening rests at oases. These narratives served multiple purposes. They preserved the practical lessons of navigation, resource management, and hazard avoidance, while simultaneously reinforcing moral and social codes critical for survival. Young travelers learned through example. A story of a caravan lost to sandstorms emphasized the importance of attentive observation, disciplined pacing, and adherence to guides' instructions. These narratives embedded survival skills within memorable, emotionally resonant frameworks. Songs and chants also reinforced learning. Rhythm and repetition were powerful tools for memorization and focus. Travelers practiced reciting directions, landmarks, and star positions through music and chant, strengthening recall even under stress. Camels, familiar with these routines, responded with predictability, further facilitating coordinated travel. Through the combination of song, story, and practice, knowledge became internalized, forming an inseparable link between cognitive understanding and physical execution. Practical exercises complemented storytelling. Guides simulated scenarios such as sandstorms, water scarcity, and navigation errors to test travelers' skills under controlled conditions. Young travelers learned to ration water precisely, recognize signs of fatigue in themselves and their camels, and identify environmental cues that signaled hidden hazards or water sources. These exercises were often intense and exhausting, reinforcing the gravity of desert survival. Failure in practice offered lessons without endangering lives, while success built confidence and skill that would be essential in real journeys. Observation was emphasized as a continuous discipline. Travelers were trained to read subtle shifts in sand, wind, and vegetation. Bird flight patterns indicated nearby water, while changes in dune formations signaled wind direction and intensity. Guides demonstrated how to integrate multiple signals to maintain orientation even in challenging conditions. This attentive observation was not innate. It was cultivated through repetition, mentorship, and immersion in the desert environment. Through this practice, young travelers developed a finely tuned awareness of the landscape, transforming it from a hostile expanse into a navigable terrain. Ritual and routine were inseparable from training. Specific practices were performed before dawn, during rest periods and at night to reinforce skills and focus. Morning routines included checking water supplies, inspecting camels, and rehearsing travel strategies. Evening rituals involved recounting observations, updating mental maps, and reviewing lessons from the day. These structured routines ingrained discipline, ensured preparedness, and fostered cohesion among travelers. The desert demanded predictability in action, even amidst unpredictable conditions, and ritualized training reinforced this principle. Cultural knowledge also emphasized ethical conduct and communal responsibility. Stories recounted the consequences of greed, neglect, or disrespect for the environment, teaching travelers to prioritize collective survival over individual desire. Guides emphasized fairness in rationing, cooperation in challenging conditions, and attentiveness to the weakest members of the group. These lessons were reinforced through practical demonstration. Water and food were shared equitably, and decisions about pace and rest were made collectively. Survival depended not only on individual skill but on social cohesion and ethical decision-making. Camels remained at the center of training. Young travelers learned to read their behavior, understand signs of stress or fatigue, and anticipate their needs. Guides demonstrated techniques for balancing loads, managing pace, and maintaining the animal's health over long distances. Camels were partners in both survival and education, teaching travelers about rhythm, patience, and the delicate balance required to thrive in an extreme environment. Observing and caring for camels also reinforced empathy, attentiveness, and the importance of nonverbal communication. Finally, training emphasized adaptability. The desert was unpredictable and conditions could change rapidly. Travelers were taught to improvise within the framework of accumulated knowledge, making decisions that balanced risk and reward. Whether responding to a sudden storm, encountering unexpected terrain, or managing limited resources, adaptability became as critical as memorized techniques. Guides encouraged critical thinking, problem-solving, and flexibility, ensuring that young travelers could survive even when circumstances deviated from expectation. Through storytelling, ritual, practical exercises, and mentorship, the next generation of desert travelers internalized both knowledge and experience. Survival was not an individual achievement but a cumulative legacy, shaped by centuries of observation, collaboration, and cultural wisdom. Each crossing reinforced the skills, discipline, and ethical frameworks necessary to endure one of Earth's harshest environments. In this way, the Sahara became more than a desert. It became a living classroom, a teacher of resilience, strategy, and humanity, ensuring that knowledge would continue to guide future generations through the vast, challenging sands.